Chapter 3. Between 1972 and 1974, after Cheyenne's death, the war amongst La Raza escalated to an all-time high. The Nuestra Familia continued to hold its ground against the Mexican Mafia, and Familianos soon began to feel confident in a way that only people who believe they're in control of their destiny feel. NF now shared all the power, but unlike the MA, NF leaders let it be known that they didn't intend to abuse their newly inherited authority. Familianos promoted education, respect, and equality, traits few MA members seem to possess. The NF believed that the MA mirrored everything that was wrong with La Raza, and it vowed to remain true to its beliefs. During those days, all Familianos, to one degree or another, found it impossible to reconcile their admirable goals and who they strived to be with the unjust system perpetuated by the MA. During those days, all Familianos, to one degree or another, found it impossible to reconcile their admirable goals and who they strived to be with the unjust system perpetuated by the MA. It was a sign of the times that without hesitation, the NF decided to resolve the discrepancies between the two organizations in its favor. The system they were expected to adhere to had been so compromised by the MA that the NF demanded an entirely new prison order. Familianos believed they were laying the foundation of a new age. Being hopelessly outnumbered only added to its necessity. As far as Familianos were concerned, if they hadn't taken an aggressive stand against the MA, the California prison system would have remained unhinged. Considering what they were trying to implement and the actions they had taken to make it happen, the NF knew it was in imminent danger of retaliation from the MA. With the loss of their leader, the MA began planning revenge. It was now rumored that the MA was planning to ambush and kill a high-ranking NF member. After several failed attempts, the Aryan Brotherhood, AB, stepped in and sided with the MA, thus forming an alliance between the two groups. The NF had suspected an alliance was likely. but it was unable to prevent it. On July 3, 1973, the AB sealed it by successfully killing Jesse Renteria Castro, a high-ranking NF leader. Since the AB was now in the conflict, the NF and the BGF joined forces, making the war between the NF and the MA the focal point of all prisoners. A portion of the documented information according to unclassified FBI files gathered during this period read, on October 11, 1973, a knifing incident at CCI Tehachapi was perpetrated by alleged members of the Mexican Mafia, which had somehow been forwarded information regarding the arrival of a prisoner from another institution. Within 24 hours of his arrival from that institution, San Quentin, the inmate was dead. The victim, Leonard Joseph Arias, had experienced difficulty with members of the Mexican Mafia, and a contract was placed on his life. On October 19, 1973, name deleted, Intelligence Division, San Joaquin Sheriff Office, advised that he had obtained a copy of the bylaws of the new family. He advised these bylaws describe the power structure of the new family and may be relevant to a current investigation being conducted due to the alleged presence of the new. He advised these bylaws describe the power structure of the new family and may be relevant to a current investigation being conducted due to the alleged presence of the new family at the Dual Vocational Institute, Tracy. On May 5, 1974, at 7:40 a.m. in San Quentin Prison, inmate name deleted, White, was stabbed twice by an unknown assailant. On May 15, 1974, at 4:10 p.m., inmate name deleted, White, was stabbed 3 times while in the East Block. On May 16, 1974, at 9:30 a.m., inmate name deleted, White, an associate of the AB, was stabbed, Louis Walter Brown, B33740, DOB, June 4, 1938. Black, to death in the prison yard. It is the opinion of San Quentin officials that this murder was in retaliation for the 2 stabbings on May 15, 1974. On May 16, 1974, the inmates isolated in the adjustment center were exercised together for the first time since April 4, 1974, when the last disturbance in the adjustment center exercise yard occurred. At 10:45 a.m., immediately upon entering the exercise yard, 13 inmates became involved in a disturbance that resulted in 6 inmates being. At 10:45 a.m., immediately upon entering the exercise yard, 13 inmates became involved in a disturbance that resulted in 6 inmates receiving stab wounds. It was the opinion of San Quentin officials that this disturbance was the continuance of the gang warfare existing at San Quentin. It took submachine gun fire to break up the disturbance. The inmates refused to surrender any weapons, and a subsequent search turned up 7 prison-made knives. On May 16, 1974, at 5:45 p.m., 2 inmates were stabbed and thrown from the 4th tier in East Block. It is the opinion of San Quentin officials that this stabbing and throwing were the result of racial problems. On August 14, 1974, SA, name deleted, Special Services Unit, SSU, advised that new family member, name deleted, will probably be released on approval of a parole program. He further advised that the above-mentioned agents intended to file a murder charge on said inmate regarding the 9/14/73 murder of inmate name deleted, a Mexican mafia member. On December 17, 1974, San Quentin officials disclosed to the FBI that no official records are kept at San Quentin separating gang violence from other violence. Estimates for 1974, however, concerning violence at San Quentin included 90 assaults and 12 murders. By 1975, the NF, with an estimated 600 members, really began to take shape inside and outside the prison system. All members behind prison walls were instructed to continue their assaults on the inmate. Its involvement in organized crime was about to go full force on the streets. As Familianos began to parole, they were given advanced instructions, assignments, and orders to report to designated locations where they were reunited with other Familianos already established on the streets. They were then given additional orders and instructions and assigned a street regimental position. The main objective of a Familiano on the streets was to organize money-making ventures and establish a Familiano bank in an organizational territory. They would be given a new set of rules, regulations, and responsibilities. NF leadership wrote a constitutional subdivision in order to avoid creating any unnecessary problems on the streets. It read, NF Constitution Subdivision for the Streets, Article 1, Section 1. The building up of this organization on the outside will be done in these 3 steps. Section 1A. The first step consists of establishing a self-supporting Familiano regiment. Each shall have a bank with $10,000 basis of no less than $1,000 and shall have both into businesses in part or in whole. Section 2. The Familia Regiment Bank will be responsible for all financial matters that occur within its own territory, Familia town, or pertains to its own business ventures, and soldados under their jurisdiction shall assist any Familiano in their regiment who, due to a mission, finds himself in need of a lawyer, doctor, or bail. The bank that is supporting the venture will be obligated to furnish him with these items. The Familiana Bank, just like the main bank, will be into legal business, but unlike the main bank, it will have no restrictions about the legality of such places. All the profits that are derived from the NF Bank will go into the Familia Bank, and from it, it will be distributed to its barrio functions. Section 3. The Familia Lieutenant shall lead and direct the regiment to fulfill the goals set forth in the subdivision of the Constitution and the Constitution in general. The lieutenant shall be in charge of the bank and see to it that its functions as described in Article 1, Section 2 of this subdivision. Section 4. Familianos soldados at first will be expected to make sacrifices insofar as they commit an illegal venture. All the profits will go into the Familia. This should be until the bank is strong enough to buy its first bank. Once this is accomplished, the soldado can either be paid on a commission basis or by a pay scale. The discretion will be up to the Familia until Step 3 is put into effect. Section 5. Mandatory rules and regulations and active sacrifices on the streets. 1. Neither rank and file familianos shall take narcotics or any other habit-forming drugs. 2. All active rank and file familianos will be expected to have a legal job. 3. No heavy or excessive drinking while on duty. 4. No familiano shall take upon his own personal ventures without authorization from his superiors. Section 6. Upon a familiano reaching his 50th birthday and has given at least 20 years of loyal and dedicated service, he shall be given an alternative whether he wants to go into semi-retirement, meaning that he will be put to manage one of the main bank's businesses and he will have nothing to do with illegal activities. However, in time of war, he may be called back into active duty by Nuestra General. If a familiano hasn't got the mental capacity for a management job, he will be given some other work with some authority within the main bank. Article 2, Section 1. The main bank will have dual functions of being a reserve in case of an emergency for the Familia Bank and will also buy into legitimate business. The first responsibility consists of supporting all wars declared by the NG and all expenses that go to the organization in the prison system. All expenses for a familiano sent on a mission outside of his territory of his home familia, unless said mission is in a money-making venture, in which case the home familia of that soldado will pay all expenses. It will be used for primary expenses of building up a new familiar regiment and as a payroll source for the regimental commander and Nuestra General. Section 2A. The second function of the main bank will be to buy into legitimate businesses, but will always have enough cash resources to meet any emergency that the Familia Bank may have. All businesses being under the jurisdiction of said bank will be kept strictly legal, and no illegal activities will be used to broaden legitimate business or to establish other businesses. Except in an emergency, the main bank may confiscate money from the Familia banks as needed to combat any crisis, but it will be the responsibility of said bank, main bank, to repay all cash money to the Familia banks. The only exception to this rule of the reimbursement is when the emergency is war. Section 3. Regimental commander, as stated in Article 2, Section 1 of this subdivision, will be to set that all familianos function within the structure. He, the commander, should be the communication link between the Familia Regiment and the Nuestra General. Security for the Familia Regiment under his care shall fall under the jurisdiction of the regimental commander. Article 3, Section 1. The third step will only be activated when this organization has accomplished the two prior steps. Article 1, Section 1 and Article 2, Section 1 of this subdivision, and the authority in the Pinta feels that the outside counterpart of the organization is strong enough to step up. With the implementation of the bylaws governing all subdivisional activities, Salinas became one of the NF's first regimental strongholds on the streets, since a great many of the older familianos like Art T-Bone Lasoya, Ernesto Little Ernie Gabriel, James Candyman Mesa, and Peter Mustache Pete Benji, who helped to invent the mob, were from that area. Salinas became known as NF headquarters, a feeding ground for illegal activity and for a sudden and dramatic increase in its murder rate. With strength in numbers, NF had its crooked hand in everything illegal, from drug sales to gambling to prostitution. Murder for hire became a profession for quick profit, that which NF didn't actually control. They were paid to protect. It was even rumored that the NF members provided the security at a few matches organized by Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers Association. NF soon abandoned its political goals, however, and shifted its focus. The priority was to obtain more power and profit, and within a year's time, NF was so well established in the Salinas area that Familianos were able to create strongholds throughout Northern California and the Central Valley. The cities of Stockton, Sacramento, Fresno, and Bakersfield quickly became NF territories. As it began to expand throughout Northern California, so did its impact and influence. The NF was beginning to significantly affect the lives of increasing numbers of people. Most Mexican Americans who lived in Northern California had by then either heard of the NF or knew someone in it. Young Latinos intrigued by prison gangs began to mimic their older brothers, cousins, and uncles who belonged to them. Gangsters became role models who were glorified, idolized, and revered. Some older Latino youth in these Northern California neighborhoods said they'd rather be gang members than football players, go to prison instead of college, and become NF lieutenants instead of the lawyers they would eventually need to represent them. More and more frequently, growing numbers of Latino youth began getting in trouble, and Robert L. Gratton, too, was one of them. In 1975, although Robert was only 10 years old, he was already studying high school level subjects and considered one of the top students at his school. Promoted from the 5th to the 7th grade, he transferred to a local middle school and continued his impressive climb to the top of his class. At this time, though, he began hanging around with some of the older wannabe gang members at his new school. It was downhill from there. Now that Robert was going to school with teenagers, it was only a matter of time before he would be faced with tough teenage situations that forced him to grow up a lot faster than the average student. His parents, along with the local school board and the Department of Education, felt Robert was mentally mature enough to make the necessary adjustments and that the benefits he'd derive would far outweigh any possible adversities. In his family, gangs were not heard of nor mentioned, and this lack of awareness would make Robert's parents' decision to allow him to advance to a higher grade one they would later regret. Every morning when he woke up, Robert found that his parents had already left for work. He'd get himself ready for school, walk to the bus stop, and wait there for the bus, whose only stop was at a very tough neighborhood rife with gang activity. One morning at the bus stop, a couple of older homeboys pulled up in a bluish-gray Monte Carlo. The driver was Ignacio Taco Mancha, and his passengers were Stephen Joker Lavario, Frank Pancho Alvarado, and Tomas Rock Bajaran, all of whom came from very rough neighborhoods. They were considered the hood's toughest thugs and were the founders of the West Side Familia, WSF, a local street gang named after their heroes, the gangsters of the Nuestra Familia. Robert had known them for years. He knew they were trouble and that he shouldn't hang around with them, although he did hang around with their younger brothers. When they offered him a ride to school, he took it gladly because he hated the hassle of riding the bus to school every morning. Robert didn't know when he got into the car that they had stolen it earlier that day. After taking Robert joyriding, they dropped him off at school. Later that same day, they were pulled over by the police, arrested and charged with grand theft auto. Robert, who had yet to get into any trouble with law enforcement, knew he had experienced a close call and vowed to stay out of trouble's way. However, a few months later, an unfortunate event would change him and his family forever. On New Year's Eve, 1976, Robert L. Gratton Sr. died of a sudden heart attack, leaving behind his wife and 3 children. Robert, who had always been close to his father, became bitter at the world. Feeling forced into playing the man of the family, his outlook on life changed for the worse, and he turned to the streets, hanging around with some of the friendly neighborhood gangsters who turned out to be not so friendly. Robert became friends with Gabriel Wino Vargas, a young thug troublemaker and gonna-be gang member whose family was tied to the NF. Robert, with no idea of what he was getting into, was intrigued by the gangster lifestyle, which the Vargas family had lived. He started running the streets with Wino. The two were always together. They rode the same bus to school, had a few of the same classes if and when they went, and walked home from school with one another. In the afternoons and on the weekends, they would be at one or the other's house, looking for something to get into and or hanging out at a local park, spray painting their Picasso street monikers on park walls with some of the other friends. Whenever one was seen, so was the other. The only exception was on or about March 21st, 1976, Robert's lucky day, a day he'll always remember. That day, Wino decided to skip school. He didn't show up to catch that morning bus and ended up hanging out at a park without Robert. At the park, Wino, along with a few of his friends, started drinking with one of the park bums who had been there before they had arrived. One thing led to another, and the next day, Robert found out that 11-year-old Gabriel Wino Vargas had been arrested and charged with the murder and robbery of a 65-year-old man who had been stabbed to death for less than $6 and some change the old guy had in his wallet. Vargas was eventually convicted in the murder and sentenced to the California Youth Authority, CYA, in Stockton. His sentence made it mandatory for him to remain incarcerated until his 21st birthday. This was Robert's first real glimpse into the gangster lifestyle. After Vargas' arrest, Robert's mother realized her son was very fortunate not to have been with him on that fateful morning. Miss Grattan decided to get Robert off the streets, to push his education, and to help him get more involved in school activities. She signed him up to play Little League Baseball, sponsored by the Police Activities League, PAL, program. Robert stopped hanging around with his old friends, started playing baseball, and became good friends with Michael Big Mike Millbrook, one of his baseball coaches and a family friend and neighbor. The two started hanging out, spent a lot of time with one another, and went places together. Miss Grattan knew and liked Millbrook, who had a really nice wife and a couple of small children. He appeared to be a decent enough guy who came from a decent neighborhood family, and he was well known in the community for his involvement in youth-oriented activities. What Miss Grattan and the others didn't know was that Millbrook was an undercover drug addict, a drug dealer, and a fence for stolen merchandise. Millbrook introduced 12-year-old Robert to marijuana, taught him to shoplift, and encouraged him to steal in order to support his ever-growing marijuana addiction. Robert's education into a life of crime on the streets had begun, and he didn't begin to fully comprehend just how violent the streets were until or about January 7, 1977, when he heard that Millbrook and his wife were shot to death in their home during a drug deal gone sour. By the time this happened, Robert was heavily addicted to marijuana and had started hanging around with some of the older homeboys who could get it, while continuing to commit some petty crimes to support his habit. By 1978, while Robert was being introduced to society's criminal elements, NF had become so heavily involved in organized crime on the streets of Northern California that many NF members who had been paroled were starting to return to prison on a wide variety of gang-related charges, ranging from kidnapping to extortion or murder. Bank robberies, home invasions, and other serious crimes were also being committed for illegal monetary gains. Towards the end of 1978, NF members on the streets had put down some heavy hits, and the Familia Bank had accumulated tens of thousands of dollars of illegal revenue. Sosa was in charge of the Familia Bank, which contained money intended to support Familia needs both inside and outside of the prison system. NF members paroled to the streets were given some financial assistance to get started in the free world, and NF members returning to prison received televisions and packages, and a little money was put into their inmate spending accounts, aka having money put on their books. The plan was that all NF monies would be shared amongst all Familianos who had dedicated their lives and freedom to the building up of the NF. What NF members eventually found What NF members eventually found out, however, was that when NF members were actually in financial need, there was no money in the Familiano bank to take care of them. The missing money was, of course, immediately questioned by all of the incarcerated NF members, the ones who had committed numerous crimes to help build the Familiano bank. Hardcore NF members demanded answers. They wanted to know where all the money had gone. Word of the missing money soon circulated amongst the rank and file members. Soldados demanded the right to review NF's financial records and transactions. One of Sosa's captains, Robert Black Bob Vasquez, began to openly complain about Sosa. Although Vasquez proved there was over 100,000 missing, Sosa denied any wrongdoing and refused to relinquish any financial records. Sosa refused to step down, causing what eventually became known as the Black Bob Brown Bob War, which caused a lot of internal chaos. Die-hard NF members weren't going to allow Sosa to freely walk away with their hard-earned money. Most of them wanted some type of reimbursement or retaliation would follow. Further investigations were conducted, and it was discovered that Sosa was not the only Familiano involved in the scam, and that if he left the NF, it wouldn't be alone, since a few of his highest-ranking captains, lieutenants, and most trusted bodyguards had agreed to follow him. The NF was at war with itself in 1979. Sosa's refusal to step down caused a minor split amongst rank-and-file members, as about 15 or 20 of his loyalists claiming to be the new NF stood by his side during the first few stages of the impeachment. However, since there had always been only one NF, the renegades were completely outnumbered. It didn't take long for the original NF members to deal with this internal conflict. Sosa was hit, as were all those who went along with him, but he survived. Anyone who claimed to belong to the new NF was hit, killed, or forced into protective custody. The missing money was never recovered nor accounted for, but it was said that Sosa's wife was living in style, wearing new clothes, driving expensive cars, and living in a new home. An NF hit squad paid her a house call, but she had relocated and couldn't be found. Near the end of 1979, the remaining captains who hadn't sided with Sosa established a new leadership and made a few minor modifications to the NF's constitution. They substituted the titles of Nuestra General, Captain, and Lieutenant in favor of a category CAT system, which read, the NF's category system was designed and or developed in order to categorize each member according to his rank, caliber, and educational status. This, in turn, allows our leadership to keep sort of track on a member's educational standings and his progress, which will enable each member to be assigned to an individual responsibility or to a position with additional responsibilities according to his experience in a wide range of areas that coincide with the member's knowledge and know-how. All members will start out as a Cat 1 member, and the highest ranking position is that of a Cat 3 member. A new recruit is automatically given the ranking of a Cat 1 member. Cat 1. This member is basically a new member in training, and these new members are taught the very basics of the O and its history, functions, and goals. It is at this first stage of NF membership which a member learns the NF constitution, weaponry skills, and enemy identification. A Cat 1 member is basically a foot soldier, and it is his responsibility to protect the leadership. A Cat 1 member does not generally hold any type of leadership position. Category 2. Once a member reaches this advanced phase of membership, he is considered to be completely knowledgeable of all Cat 1 requirements. Cat 2 members are given an in-depth training in a wide variety of NF areas and in turn are responsible for training Cat 1 members. Cat 3. This is the NF's leadership, and these members are seasoned soldados that have the authority to make all decisions for all those under their guidance according to existing policies and procedures. A Cat 3 member is also responsible for establishing old territories, making sure Cat 2 members are upholding their responsibilities and that they are making sure all NF members under their guidance are fulfilling their obligations within the NF's constitution. Along with the CAT system, the new leadership put together an organizational governing body, OGB, so that no one member could ever be given sole, complete, and/or supreme authority. Under this new leadership, overall authority resided in a 3-member board known as La Mesa or La Tabla, the table. Unlike Sosa's unlimited dictatorial authority, the 3 top-ranking NF members known as OGB representatives were voted into their leadership positions, receiving equal yet limited authority. They were governed by a set of OGB rules and regulations that read, The OGB will govern and oversee all organizational activities. 2. There shall be no more than 3 OGB members at any one time. 3. The 3 OGB members shall be titled as such: a speaker and a chief. B. Leader of the guerreros, keeper of the armies. 4. All members of the OGB will respectfully guide the directives and honor the will of the people. 5. Any member who is considered to be a re-entry shall not be allowed to hold OGB responsibilities. 6. In order to fulfill any vacancy within the OGB, a prospective member must be ranked no lower than that of a Category 3 member. 7. All members who are selected to assume OGB responsibilities must have already made the ultimate sacrifice for the O and can have no less than 10 years of loyal membership. 8. The replacement and/or removal of an OGB member must arrive solely from a 3/4 majority rules vote honored by all Cat 3 members. 9. No one OGB member has the authority to make any major O decisions unless in accordance with at least one other OGB member. 10. Any and all decisions made by the 2/3 vote of the OGB shall be final. In 1980, as the NF's new leadership began to take shape, an NF lieutenant named Flaco from Fresno, who had chosen to side with Sosa, was much sought after. He was considered a primary target, not only because of his status in the organization, but because he was close friends with Sosa. Since Flaco was a longtime member who had portrayed himself as dedicated to NF and its principles, most of NF's remaining members who didn't side with Sosa thought he wanted to return and function amongst the rank and file of NF's new leadership. The new leadership offered Flaco the opportunity to re-enter the gang under one condition, that he hit Sosa. Flaco refused, which in turn made him, in the eyes of the leaders, that much more of a threat to the gang's safety and security. Within a week of his refusal, NF's new leaders decided to have him hit, which would make the statement that the NF wasn't going to allow Sosa or any of those who sided with him off the hook. Another high-ranking NF member, Robert Crackers Vindiola, also from Fresno, was ordered to hit Flaco. He too refused, and instead of hitting Flaco, Crackers was overheard warning him that he was in danger of being hit. It was said that Crackers and Flacos were good friends for a number of years, and that Crackers chose his homeboy over his NF obligations. It didn't take long before a willing NF member hit Crackers. Crackers, along with Flaco, started their own gang. This new prison gang was made by and for Latino inmates from Fresno and eventually became known as the F-14ers, who don't side with anyone but their own homeboys from Fresno. F-14ers are the sworn enemies of the Nuestra Familia.